Welcome back to another episode of Listen Up Younger Self. I am ridiculously excited today. I have a great guest. Women, ladies, even men, you're going to be excited about this. This guest is actually one of America's top midlife dating coaches with over 200,000 YouTube subscribers. I have this huge, long message that I had ChatGPT put out for me, but essentially he's like, I'm a dating coach. He's a dating speaker. He has a book. He's an author, but he's like, I've just been through the shit of it, and I know, I know a man's perspective on what women are doing right, what they're doing wrong, what men are doing right, what men are doing wrong, and I am ridiculously excited to have you here today because everybody can use a fresh perspective, especially since the majority of my listeners are women. And to be able
Yeah.
to get a man's perspective on this, I think is going to be so refreshing and just so welcoming. So, welcome, welcome. Thank you for being here today.
Well, thank you for having me, Heather. I think this will be fun. So
Yeah,
let's get into the nitty gritty.
let's get into the nitty gritty. Okay, you have been coaching. How long have you been coaching now?
I'm about a decade and a half, maybe a little bit longer now.
And do you find that you coach primarily more women or men?
Well, I mostly work with women because, men typically men just look to see how to meet women. Women spend their entire day trying to figure out what men are thinking. So, and I'm saying this a little tongue in cheek. So if I've offended anyone hearing that, but I've just observed that women are always online going, okay, let me try to figure out the guy because relationships are radically dysfunctional today. I think we've seen a gigantic evolution in relationships over the last 30, 40 years, unlike traditionally where women were dependent upon men for survival throughout history. That began changing around the 1960s, both with women's empowerment, but also with birth control. So there wasn't a consequence for mating with the wrong guy. And now, with the advent of internet, it's just changed the whole dating landscape. So I think it's time to completely do an overhaul on the way we approach relationships. And that's the conversations I usually have.
You know, I didn't even think about that, about the fact that birth control changed the way women are, and it gave us power. It did give us power. And then over the last 30, 40 years, we've just been able to keep running with that. And women have started to find their worth and all of this and all of that. So we aren't in a relationship anymore just to be with a man and for them to be the primary breadwinner, and we all have our goals and we want to be more. And so what would you say is what you hear a lot when you're coming into it? Like, can you give me a couple examples of what's really
Well,
holding women back?
well, it's interesting. I want to piggyback on what you said. There's absolutely a women's empowerment to, freely have intimacy without a consequence. And I mean sexual intimacy without a consequence, which is great to have that empowerment, but there's also a double-edged sword with that. That's pretty much opened the door to casual relationships, hookups, and situationships. So in the past, where there was a consequence for having either unprotected sex or, sex because there would be a baby 9 months later. Now it's opened the door to the casual nature of relationships because we no longer operate from a partnership based way of approaching relationships. And now let me reframe that. Women oftentimes want partnership based relationships, but because sex is rather easily obtainable, it's opened the door to casual relationships. And quite frankly, I mean, I'm going to criticize men in this particular case. They're not consciously paying attention to the emotional consequence. There used to be a 9 month consequence for being unconscious in the dating process, but now it's opened the door to an emotional consequence to briefly enter into a relationship with someone, have the benefits of physical intimacy and connection, and then just say, "Oh, this isn't a fit for me," and move on. So, the reason why I coach women is I'm their big brother. I'm there on. If I could be there on a first date with a shotgun pointed at a guy's face, I'd say, "What's your intentions with my little sister?" And so that's the key word. intentionality. Today, dating isn't intentional. And let me expand upon that for a second. We operate from a basis of entertainment, romance, and physical connection. That's the driving force of dating today. When dating is, quite frankly, a process of vetting. By the way, do you know why they call it dating in the dictionary?
No,
Because holy fucking shit, trying to figure out another human being was taken. So they just replaced it with the word dating. Dating is a vetting process to decide if you want to be in a relationship with someone. But since we hyper focus on entertainment, romance, and physical connection, most people aren't determining, is this person partnership material? And that's the challenge we're faced with today.
that's incredible. So just to play the women versus the men, I mean, I know
Yeah.
a lot of women like to play the dating or play that I'm really cool with being out there, but I mean, go back to primal. Men are meant to mate, women are meant to nurture. And so don't you think that as much, I'm sure there's some women out there that are really okay with it, but I think women just naturally can say they're okay with the hookup, but I feel like we have feelings first. Do you know what I mean? Like we
Yes.
get attached first. No matter what we try to portray, we're in.
So, and in all fairness, I'm by the way, I'm an equal opportunity criticizer. I criticize male behavior and I criticize women behavior. Just so you know, I'm equal opportunity in that particular case. But I think the real challenge is because we have access through the internet of so many people in the dating market pool. Unlike the past, when it was 50, 100, thousands of years ago, we had a small pool to choose from. Now, because we have this large pool, I believe we have to operate with more intentionality. And that means really getting crystal clear on what do you really want for your life from a relationship standpoint, and really understand that your values are most important. Your lifestyle compatibility is most important. But here's the tricky part: emotional maturity is most important for a healthy, successful relationship. And we have a population, we don't have the population of the Walking Dead, like the TV series. We have a population of walking wounded, emotionally wounded men and women out in the dating marketplace that lack real emotional maturity or relationship skills. And then they're butting up against those issues once they begin dating and in a relationship with someone.
And so don't you find that it's something that I see a lot. People are so sometimes more in love with the outcome than they are the journey, so that they're ready to take the next step sometimes. So they
Yeah.
carry that emotional immaturity into their marriage or into a partnership, and then it festers. And so like where do people identify that? Do you know what I mean? Like, how do we really get to the root so that it doesn't keep going? Because that's why I feel like there's so many divorces, there's so many breakups, there's so many things going on. It's because people really haven't figured their shit out.
Yeah, I'm a big proponent of personal development, self-help, spiritual work, and therapy. I call it self-love, which is the title of my book, What the Heck is Self-Love Anyway? Is that I believe the journey starts within ourselves. And I think one of the challenges that we're faced with is the capacity to really learn to love ourselves, to love our own company, to not be dependent upon someone else for our emotional needs. That's the goal, I think. And relationships trigger our shit like nobody's business. I mean, dating and relationships trigger, I'm not good enough, I'm not lovable, I'm not likable. And ultimately, I believe the journey of life is a journey of self discovery, and relationships are part of it. And yet, we are so indoctrinated in this belief that happiness comes from when we're mated with someone else. People live longer because they're mated with someone else. Actually, men live longer only because of one reason. Why men live longer when they're in relationship is because men are lazy, and women push men to go to the doctor and take their medication, where men are lazy at that. I mean, honestly, if men could just do that for themselves, it's not happiness is derived from another person. It's if you take care of your physical health, you'll just live longer. for the most part, and I'm generalizing. And there's no doubt being mated can bring us joy. But the real journey is, if you're not mated, is can you find that same joy whether you're in a relationship or not? Can you find fulfillment whether you're in a relationship or not? And we still have a societal narrative and a basic narrative that happiness is derived when we're with somebody else.
Yeah, I talk about that a lot in my podcast. I talk about the fact that we have to make ourselves happy first. Whoever we're with is just like this great like addition to it, not
Yeah.
the person making us happy. What do you, how do you go about that with coaching people? How do you help them start that?
So it starts with something I call know thyself. And let me preface this for a moment. We're in 2025 at the time we're recording this. If we go back 100 years ago and beyond, most of the time when we mated with someone, they were within our tribe. I mean, in other words, it was our town, our village, our tribe. Most likely we shared the same values, we had connections through family, we shared the same politics, we shared the same, culture and ethnicity for the most part. Okay. Fast forward now, we're in a melting pot of different values, different ideologies, different cultures. And so we are no longer similar. That's what made it easier hundreds and thousands of years ago. Now, in all fairness, throughout history, women have been treated like property. So it's not like, like I'm grateful that women have empowerment, and yet at the same time, from that property standpoint, we glorify the past as being something so wonderful. Believe me, it wasn't wonderful 100 years ago. We just have a fantasy that's wonderful. But coming back to know thyself, so it starts with individual empowerment. It starts by knowing what's known as your love attachment style. Most humans are unaware that we attach to another person in an insecure way. And this is where the minute you start something in an insecure way, it's a recipe for disaster later on down the road. So understanding your love attachment style. And there's a great book called Attached by Amir Levine and Rachel Heller. I highly recommend everyone getting this book to understand their attachment style. It's how we oftentimes confuse love with an unhealthy attachment. Also, know thyself represents knowing your being self-aware. That means knowing your fears, your insecurities, your negative patterns, your limiting beliefs, your judgments of others, how your actions can affect another human being. Self-awareness is being the audience member in your life to witness these experiences from the objective point of view. We human beings aren't very objective. We get defensive. We'll make a stand for our limitations. We'll make a stand for it only to butt heads with another human being. So when we begin to know ourselves, we start to evolve into a different point of view of the purpose of a relationship. And I believe, okay, here's the tricky part, Heather. Most of my audience is midlife. Okay. Um, which I say is after baby making years before retirement. When we were in our 20s and 30s, the purpose of a relationship was really easily defined: make babies, raise a family. That was the purpose. For those of us in midlife, most couples don't know what the purpose of the relationship other than companionship, connection, and physical intimacy. Without knowing your purpose, you don't have a foundation to build a relationship upon.
That's a very good point. You're right. We're
I
all,
know I said a lot in that
no,
monologue.
it was so good because we do have checklists. We're brought up believing there's checklists as to what we're supposed to accomplish in our life. And you're right. People don't think past when the kiddos leave. They're just
Yeah.
like, and that's when I find a lot of people fall apart is because they don't know themselves outside of being a mom or outside of being a dad. They don't know what that next step looks like because they haven't had to focus on their relationship just as the two of them for 20, 30 years. I mean, my
Yeah.
son's 31 years old and our daughter's 24. So it was 31 years of raising kids, You know what I mean? And it just because they leave the house doesn't mean it's necessarily over with the raising part of
Yeah.
it, you know? But it is, it's like, how do you then look at the other person and be like, okay, it's just me and you now, babe. Like, we've got this, negating all the other things that you've had to put into this. So it is, it's like, then you've got to peel off the layers and remember who you were at the core. And
So the successful relationships, and since my audience are those single looking for love
mhm,
in midlife, kind of not in a romantic relation or not married for a long time. Um, the core I see with every happy couple centers around a strong friendship with one another. They play well together and they laugh well together. Like that's the core of the happy couples. Now, there are a lot of couples, hey, I've known you for 30 years of my life. You've been a witness to my life. You take care of my needs. I take care of your needs. And they have a stable relationship, but it's not juicy and delicious. The juicy and delicious ones have friendship, play, and humor. That's what I've observed. So now, when you're in the dating marketplace, we hyper focus on the entertainment, that romance piece, thinking we've built friendship with someone. And since we tend to hyper focus on physical connection more so, that there's a sexual connection, that blinds us to whether or not you're actually friends with this person, that you actually play with this person, that you have fun together, that you laugh together. It's kind of we're wearing rose-colored glasses when we're that chemical reaction of, oh my God, you feel the chemistry and oxytocin and dopamine and serotonin and testosterone and estrogen is flowing, that we find ourselves in circumstances where we're driven by the chemistry, but we haven't really established a core friendship with someone. So this is what I'm an advocate for from a dating perspective is first, look at figure out, is this person I'm dating, do we share the same values, at least core values? Are our lifestyles compatible with one another's? Heather, I see so many people dating that have incompatible lifestyles. One person lives in New York, one person lives in Los Angeles. They see each other once every, 3 months, and they think, oh my God, we have this great relationship because they have a vacation together when they get together, but they're not actually building something together. And then, as I said before, emotional maturity. We have a wounded what did I say, a walking wounded population that doesn't even have good relationship skills, thinking that it's always this, Heather, it's his fault, it's her fault, it's his fault. It's always pointing the finger and not looking those three fingers pointing back at themselves.
well, I find that all the time. I mean, I get a lot of feedback on some of the episodes that I've done, and I'm always trying to say, okay, this is the issue. This is what he probably did, but let's take a look back at us because it
Yeah.
is, I mean, just that whole self-awareness part of it. But going back to what you were saying with building that friendship, I mean, I always say I feel like I really hit the jackpot with my
Yeah.
relationship. I really do. And my focus is to help other people hit the jackpot too. And because I want
Yeah.
everyone to have their happily ever after. I really do. I think it's possible for every single person. Um, so you're saying if you haven't found out, let's say you're too far into, let's say you're married now, okay? And
Yeah.
okay, and what if you don't feel like you have that friendship? Do you think there's going back from there? Do you think you can go back and build that? Or is it kind of, are you SOL at that point? Are you just buddies, like roommate?
Well, I think first, most likely, you might have swept a lot of things under the rug and you have to identify your core differences. Ultimately, we're going to have differences with a person. And the question is, have you swept it under the rug and do you tolerate the differences, and then have resentment towards that? Or can you move to a place of understanding and even acceptance of our differences? Because no two, I mean, I suspect you and your partner are not alike, but ultimately you've reached a place of acceptance of your differences. And until you've kind of covered your core differences and come to some level of acceptance, I don't think you can go back. And then from that vantage point, you could work on building the friendship. And I think it's about finding, you know, when I think of friendship, I think of like my friends are people I can't wait to tell the good news in my life. But it's also I need your help when there's bad news. You're going to be there for me in the bad news. That's one of the fundamentals. But most importantly, I can talk with you. I can talk with you. I'm not afraid to talk about the difficult things. I think that's what core friendship is. I also think having a shared passion, like I mentioned earlier, play and fun, I think, or humor. I think humor is critically important. I hope that you and your partner have really good humor together, that you can laugh at each other, because we have to laugh at the idiocracy of this experience, because I mean, sometimes just watching the news, I'm not to suggest that it is a laughable event, but the insanity of the world is sometimes almost humorous. And if we can't look at it from that vantage point, that's why going to comedy shows, I think, are so healthy, because it looks at life from a humorous standpoint. Can you go backward? Yeah, anything is possible. I think you can even resurrect your sexual relationship if it's been dormant. It requires intentionality, it requires effort, and it requires commitment to wanting to get to the other side. And I think it was Chris Rock said, you can it's hard to move a couch by yourself, but when two people are moving a couch, it's a lot easier. If you're both doing it, Heather, I think it's possible.
Yeah, I love all of that together. Do you think it's possible? This is something I talk about from time to time, so I'd love your take on it because I believe if one person can move the needle forward, and I think that like if you're in it, but you're intentional, like you said, because I think that's huge, and you're consistent with raising the bar, doing all of the things, being intentional with touch and, communication, all that. I think that the other person will come along. You know what I mean? How do you feel
I
about
think you can lead by example, but the other person has to want to. They have to. And most part of the reason why people don't is because they're wounded from their past in such a way that it's difficult. We all carry childhood wounds and adult traumas, and a lot of times one person might be intentional and lead by example, but the other person has to want to move past their own limitations. If that's what's causing the disconnect, then they have to want to move past the limitation. It's like, I'm going to use a crude example, but a person who's an alcoholic, you can do interventions to your blue in the face, but that person has to want to stop drinking and make the choices and maybe go to a retreat center and all those types of things. If they don't want to, they're just going to continue in that same pattern.
yeah. Um, I that makes complete sense.
But and let me say something. Here's where the dilemma. If you love me, you would want to. That's not a reason. It's not based on if you love me, you'd want to, is you want to love yourself. That's the trick is I love myself that I want to improve and heal, not because if it's another person, because then that's an obligatory reason. And that's never a healthy place to come from because you'll resent that at some point in time.
Very true. And I think sometimes if you love yourself more, you become more attractive in all the ways, right?
Sure.
Yeah, like when you show up as your best version, you are
Yeah, but
just,
here's the thing about okay, so I want to say that I am riddled with flaws. I am like that's why I can coach from my dysfunctionality because I recognize that we are imperfect beings. It's at least it's the difference is are you making effort to improve because self-love is not a destination, it's an experience, it's a place we work on, and probably 7 seconds before we pass away is when I mean, I'm just saying this tongue in cheek, is when we actually go, okay, I love myself, boom, I'm gone. um it's a practice, it's not a destination. And ultimately the I believe the real purpose for a relationship after the baby making years is I'm here to help you grow, and you're here to help me grow as a person, to really grow, to help me love myself. And I'm here to help you grow to love yourself. And we're in it as a team. But most people operate look, I just want some companionship. I want some connection. I want some sex. And a lot of times, and men are guilty of this more so than women, and I want it at my beck and call. You know, I want it on my terms. And real partnership is like real trust is I've got your best interest at heart. Your best interest are my best interest. That's trust. When we operate is your best interest or my best interest or your best interest. And I'm going to always look for your best interest at not at the expense of myself, because I don't believe in being a doormat, but commensurate with self.
I really like that. I do. I really, really like that. You know, I'm going back to your your bio. I went back to
Yeah.
your page and all that stuff, and you had so many great topics on there because as much as the self-love can be something that pushes somebody away, just the needing to be right, the not being self-aware. Is there anything else that's like on your top of your list that you feel like we as women can do that is just repelling?
Oh, well,
And maybe repelling is a hard
but
word, but
I mean, well, for one is I think we self-sabotage by having a laundry list of must-haves in the early stage of dating versus three or five core must-haves and three or five deal breakers, from a dating vantage point. So I think, there's a joke of men's three must-haves is, please forgive me, this isn't mine, okay, but feed me,
uh-huh.
fuck me, shut the fuck up when I'm watching TV. And I'm just making this joke, okay? And women's laundry list is, a book like this, it's 1,400 pages. I think what everybody can do is just really get to the core of what your must-haves are in a relationship and just keep it simple for the beginning and know what your core deal breakers is. And here's the thing: your core deal breakers isn't honesty, integrity, and trustworthiness. That's just a given. I'm talking about look at it from the vantage point of lifestyle differences as the like recognizing that lifestyle incompatibility is one of the core challenges in midlife, because we come to the table with baggage and luggage. So know your differences from that, know your deal breakers from that standpoint, because mistrust, dishonesty, those are always a deal breaker. Also, I think value-based deal breakers like health, like I'm not interested in dating someone who's a smoker. As an example, that's a deal breaker for me. Not that too many people smoke, but it's just that awareness of what your core values are, and then look at your deal breakers from that vantage point.
Yeah, and I think that's exactly what I was thinking. I was like, I needed to have someone who was healthy, who liked an active lifestyle, something like that. I couldn't have a couch potato, right? That just was not going to align with who I was. Somebody that loved to travel, would that be something that would be some one
So,
of the
it's
values, right?
interesting. Every woman's profile I see travel, 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 travel. I'm terrible at travel. I am a nervous Nelly when I travel. When I'm in a foreign country, I'm a basket case. Okay. So, because for me, travel is the inner journey. I mean, for me, travel is I do psychedelics to go inward to me, the inner journey is the travel for me. Yeah, does that mean I won't travel? I absolutely will travel, but I'm very upfront with someone. Look, if you need a seasoned traveler, I'm not your guy. And plus, how often do we really travel? A couple times a year at best. So when I see that, like, is that really worth making it a deal breaker? Would you rather have a partner that will drive you to, your colonoscopy appointment, or, go and take a picture of the Eiffel Tower with your finger on it? Like, ask yourself what's really most important. Is it to see the world, or to have a witness in your life, to have a companion, to have humor, fun, and somebody to be there for you at the end of the day? And I do believe that there's a hyper focus. I said this earlier: entertainment, romance, and physical connection. We hyper focus on that and don't spend enough time focusing. Is this person a good person enough that will be there for me and wipe the vomit from my face if I'm going through chemotherapy? That's love. Love isn't travel. That's just entertainment.
That's the
And
entertainment
I
part
think
of it.
we're very superficial here in the United States. We are hyper superficial from that vantage point. And we have this false sense of choice because of the internet. So we just figure, oh, if it doesn't work with this person, I can just go back online and get a new person. And guess what? You find out you're 60 years old and it's a lot harder to date in your 60s than when you were in your 40s.
Well, and I mean, I always pray to God that I never ever have to go back into that dating world. It's just I can't imagine. It's so different than it was for me many, many years ago. And if you're dating, because I know I do have some single people who listen to this, would you suggest then that people wait on the sexual part of it before that they really jump in? If we're really hyper focused on entertainment, sexual parts of the relationship, if that's gonna hurt us really forming a friendship connection, do you recommend that they wait?
I'm here to say you're a grown up and you can make your own choices. I've known people that have had sex on a first date and they've lived happily ever after. I know people who waited to have sex till marriage and it imploded, 37 seconds later, and I'm being tongue in cheek. What I believe is what I think the foundation of every relationship should be built on trust. In other words, the first commitment you make is to building trust. If you can build trust on a first date, bravo to you, because you're a superhero mind reader, person that should be, the unicorn, because I don't believe that exists. But I think your foundational piece is to build trust with one another. And how long does it take to build trust? It takes a while. Now, again, oftentimes sex does lead to those experiences, but more often than not, it doesn't. So, you have to make that choice for yourself. I think, and I do believe if you're going to be physically intimate, then you agree to monogamy and exclusivity as your second commitment to one another is if you're going to do it regularly. I think you should agree to that. And again, today, there's just a cavalier, casual way people are dating. And again, can sex lead to full-blown commitment? Yes, but it's highly unlikely.
It kind of clouds things sometimes, I from what I remember in dating. So,
Yeah.
like I said, it's been a minute. So it's been a while
Well,
since I've been
it's
into that.
interesting because your podcast is what I would tell my younger self. But you
Mhm.
know what's interesting about that, Heather? If somebody gave me all this advice that I learned today, I still wouldn't have listened because ultimately we learn through our experiences. That's where the real juice is. And, I mean, to some degree, I think it's important. Like I look at myself, I've reached a pinnacle of elder, if you will. Like I'm here to pass on wisdom. But most importantly, it's just here to give perspective. And if we, ideally, I would have liked to have had more perspective before I made choices, because very few of us really have those elders, those people with wisdom, giving us their perspective on things to help us make better choices along the way. And we are of a generation like, look at my mother had no clue about online dating or any of this stuff, so her wisdom was somewhat limited. But at the same time, I think the value of coaches is to help provide some wisdom and to at least to be objective when you make your choices. If nothing else, what you would tell your younger self is these things and allow that them to process that and at least be more objective versus cavalier, and ambivalent in the way we make choices.
So I think that's a great place to finish this up. Tell me, how can people get a hold of you if they want
Sure.
to find your book, find coaching resources, find your
Yeah.
YouTube channel? Like, how do they do this?
Well, first, I want to thank you so much for allowing me to share with your audience. You're a great interviewer. You're a lot of fun, and I really appreciate the questions you asked. Look, at my name is listed here, Jonathan Aslay. You can just cut and paste that into Google. The first thing that will pop up is my YouTube channel. If you want to check out my YouTube channel, my website thereafter, you can join my mailing list. My social media will pop up. those are the three places. If something I said resonates with you, then watch me and see if it continues to resonate. I'm here to just offer perspective to help people make better choices for themselves. We live in a very chaotic life or period of time in life that didn't exist, before social media and really television. So I think we're having to evolve as a species, sometimes with too much information. But most importantly, I think this is all about individual empowerment, like taking charge of your life by being introspective, by being self aware, by knowing thyself. I think you'll have a better experience.
I absolutely love all of that. And so I'm going to put all of his information in the show notes. So anyone looking to contact him or just get more of his wisdom, please, you'll find it down below. Thank you, Jonathan, so much for being on today. I so appreciate it. I've absolutely enjoyed this.
Oh, thank you, Heather. Likewise.